All right, this is Ubaid on behalf of Lee Electronics, and in this video, we'll be looking at the impact of price ceiling and price floors on total surplus. Okay, so in the last video, we talked about surplus, both the producer and the consumer surplus. And we know, okay, that when it comes to a surplus, okay, this is your supply curve and this is your demand curve. Okay, and suppose this was the equilibrium point. Your consumer surplus will be the area beneath the demand curve and just above the equilibrium point. This is your consumer surplus. Let's label it as CS. And the area above the supply curve. Let's assume that this is your supply curve, and this is the area above the supply curve. And this area above the supply curve and beneath the equilibrium point, this will be your supplier surplus. And let's label it SS. All right, now if the government was to go ahead and regulate the prices and for some reason set a price ceiling, your price ceiling will be about the equilibrium point. Okay, so let's assume that this is your price ceiling. Okay, let's assume that this is your price ceiling. Okay, and if the government does go ahead and impose this price ceiling over here, okay, what's going to end up happening is, okay, your supplier surplus, okay, may be limited to what it is right now. Okay, this is just below the equilibrium line. Okay, which is fine for the supplier as well as the consumer because the price ceiling does not impact the supplier. But if you have a supplier who is willing to sell, okay, at a higher price and a consumer who is willing to buy at a higher price, you may have a new equilibrium point in the future. Now, in that case, what's going to end up happening is, okay, you will have a new equilibrium point, which means that over here you have your supplier, okay, let's say for over here, for example, you have supplier and consumer, you have a new equilibrium point. Okay, and because of this price ceiling, they cannot sell at this point. Okay, they have to go below this price ceiling. Okay, which means your equilibrium point, the price at which the supplier is able to sell and the price at which the consumers are willing to buy, this will be below your equilibrium price over here. Okay, it will be below the price, your price ceiling. Okay, so apart from that, you also have, okay, price ceilings that are below the equilibrium point. So suppose the government was to go ahead and regulate the prices in such a way that the price ceiling would be below the equilibrium point. Okay, so let's suppose this is your price ceiling. All right, so let's suppose this is your price ceiling. And this price ceiling, for some reason, is below the equilibrium point. And because this price ceiling is below the equilibrium point, we know that the supplier surplus will be reduced. And the reason why it will be reduced is because initially the supply surplus was this area over here. Now that there is a price ceiling, okay, below the equilibrium point, let's suppose the supplier's curve is something like this. Okay, the supplier's surplus will be limited to this area over here. It will be limited to this particular area over here. And the reason why it'll be limited is because obviously the equilibrium point will be at the price ceiling. Okay. And because the equilibrium point will be at the price ceiling, the consumer surplus will go ahead and climb up. Okay, so the consumer surplus would be this area over here. All right, so this will be a new consumer surplus, CS. All right, now likewise, if the government was to go ahead and set a price floor, okay, now usually the price floor would stop the prices from falling further down. Okay. However, if the government was to set a price floor above the equilibrium point for whatever reason, okay, let's say we're talking about agriculture one more time. Okay, and this price floor is about the equilibrium point, at which point the farmers are able to sell and make profit every year, year by year. Okay, so if that's the case, then what's going to end up happening is, okay, your supplier, okay, will have more of a surplus compared to your producer. Okay, because remember, the surplus is the area underneath your demand curve. Okay, so let me draw this over here. Surplus will be the area underneath the demand curve. And if this is the equilibrium point and this is the price floor, we know the new equilibrium point will be somewhere over here, for example. Okay, so this may look something like this. Okay, demand and supply. And because this new equilibrium point, okay, it looks something like this, we know that the area underneath the demand curve has now been reduced because of the price floor. Okay, because the price floor is more than what the consumers were able to pay because of the original equilibrium point. Okay, and what the suppliers were willing to accept. Now that their expectations have gone up because of the price floor, the suppliers have more of a surplus than the consumer. All right. So that's basically the difference between a supplier surplus and a consumer surplus. And when you add them both up, you will have something called total surplus or economic surplus. All right. In both cases, whether you have a price floor or a price ceiling, the economic surplus will go down. Okay. Either because the consumer surplus went down or because of the producer surplus went down. Okay. So your total or economic surplus will be reduced. All right, so that's it for this video. On behalf of V Electronics, this is Obey. Have yourself a great day.